Okay, we're going to talk today about depression. Christine has this incredible book that is packed with stuff, so bear with us because we can't go through everything. Yes, The Catholic Guide to Depression. Now, by Aaron Carity, MD, with Father John Civic, I believe. Civic?
Seahawk?
Okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't read it. I even put my
Sorry,
glasses
Father
on, and
John.
yeah, sorry, but I have to say that you are a dreamboat for having the book in your hot little hands and going through it because I just read the review online, and I was like, this is packed with goodies. So bear with us as we try and cover as much as we possibly can on this illness that is an epidemic. And praise God, I have not had to experience this, not only myself, but in my family. I will say, though, I went to a doctor. I was awfully tired. And I know those of you who watch this probably know that I smoked pot for a long time, and it was beyond the smoking pot tiredness. I actually went to the doctor for it. And before I even walked out, I had a prescription in my hands for Wellbutrin. And I started taking it for a little bit, and I thought, you know what? I don't think I want to be, oddly enough, on drugs. And I was already on drugs, but I don't want to be on this kind of a drug for the rest of my life. I'll just deal with this. I did talk to a few people who were on those meds. And one woman, and it was one of the reasons why I got off, was she said that my mood was just so stable that she didn't find anything really funny. She didn't find anything really sad, that she was just kind of on this even plane. And I like it when I laugh hysterically and when I cry out of the middle of nowhere.
Well,
Usually I've got some
I'm
emotion.
glad you brought that up because that is a hotly debated topic, and I will self-divulge. I am on 10 milligrams of Celexa, and I have been for a long time, and my husband is on 40 milligrams. So the two of us are case studies for it doing a miraculous job.
Wow.
10 is a very low dose, but I didn't even know that I had mild depression mixed with a little bit of anxiety until I kept leading these Rachel's Vineyard retreats, which is for post-abortion healing. And it would take me, I was so exhausted afterwards. The first one took me a week to recover, the second 2 weeks. And I was so depleted that after a while, it would take 2 months for me to feel like I got myself back.
Wow.
And I didn't know what was wrong with me. I thought, why am I so for me, I didn't have the classic symptoms of depression, which is a sleep disturbance. I didn't have a sleep disturbance. I didn't have an appetite disturbance. I didn't have hopelessness. I didn't have what's called Anhedonia, where you don't have pleasure in things or life that you used to have pleasure in. I didn't have any suicidal ideation, and I didn't have loss of energy, and I didn't have mental confusion. So you would think, how would the doctor prescribe such a thing? But when I sat down in the doctor's office and I said, I don't know what's wrong with me, I started to cry. So there was something there. And for me, it was very unique. I felt a buzzing in my abdomen area that wouldn't go away. It was like a bzzz feeling. And I thought, I am not right. And it turns out I had a chemical depletion. So I don't know, for 6 years now. I kid you not. Usually it takes longer for antidepressants to kick in, but within a very short while, I was totally back to myself. And and before that, no amount of prayer, no amount of this, no amount of that was helping me. So sometimes, and doctors say this, and this is a very good book by a medical psychiatrist who should know that it is a huge gift, that if it's prescribed correctly, and if it is what is part of the problem, meaning a chemical imbalance, then yes, it's a godsend. My husband self-divulges, so I can talk about him on the air. He wouldn't mind. But he, once I said to him before I ever took one, because I didn't feel like I needed anything like that until I had this buzzing experience that wouldn't go away.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Did you have was it like indigestion too when you ate
No,
food, or it was
wasn't.
just like a nervous stomach? Is that what you would call it?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. It was a feeling, just utter depletion to the point of a rattling inside that was a low grade vibration, and I can't explain that. So for a long time, I thought it was something spiritual. I thought, well, maybe I just needed deliverance, and it wasn't. It was chemical.
Wow. Okay, so back to John. Sorry.
John, if he goes off his, I wanted him to go off of his medication thinking maybe he doesn't need it. Let's check it out. So he was so different. I was like, go back on. Go back on.
How?
Take as many as you need.
Oh, get out of here.
Oh, it was so funny. He, all of a sudden, he's like, everybody's going to clean now. Everyone will clean the house now. And I'm doing something else now. Or just this controlling, nervous energy that was really hard to be around. And if he misses a dose, it's kind of like, did you take your thing today? So it's a totally different energy comes over him, and
that seems a little bit. Isn't that more like an anxiety thing, or like
depression is very? I'm a licensed clinical social worker, so I had to study all of this, and I've treated people with dysthymia, which is a mild, more ongoing depression, and I've treated people who suffer from major depression, which is usually episodic. And so I forgot your question.
So I was asking if it sounded more like it would be more like an anxiety thing.
Oh, yes. And
versus I can't get out of bed.
Anxiety is a common symptom of depression as well, actually. And it usually goes with depression. Not always. But it is like, and I should have mentioned it along with the other things that
symptoms,
symptoms that come with it. So
that's what you got me here for.
Yay! One could theorize, and it's shown in the book that there are doctors and psychologists and psychoanalysts who notice that they can be the flip side of the same coin, that they somewhat go hand in hand sometimes. Not always the case, though. And so, yes, it's a epidemic, and I think in modern disjointed society, we're going to see it more and more, and it's very, very serious and can lead to suicide. And people who do commit suicide had depression, so it's something to be taken very seriously. And one of the reasons that we wanted to do this show is because it's necessary to get help. What happens is if you have a depressive episode, which is at least a week of half the symptoms I mentioned, problems with sleep, appetite, hopelessness, and so on. If that lasts a week and you have a depressive episode, you're 60% more likely to have another one later in life. And if you have two, you're even more likely to get a third, and so on. So treatment right up front at the beginning is extremely important. And a lot of people who are religious feel like they can pray this away, and they moralize it. Now, true, sin causes misery, no doubt. But on the flip side of it, not all depression is caused by sin. And so a lot of people don't seek the help they need because they figure, well, if I just go to confession one more time, if I'm just a better person, then this is going to go away. It has so many possible causes, and usually not just one. It's a combination of things. So it can be social, it can be genetic, it can be, you're much more likely to have depression if one or both parents had depression, and you're more likely than that if your parent or parents had an early onset before their 20s of depression. You're even more likely to suffer from it. If you've had a trauma, that can contribute to falling into major depression. If you have some chemical imbalance, and if you're not eating well, if you're not sleeping well, there's so many contributing factors. If you've been abused, if you've been neglected. So not all of that is, of course, sin, right? There are so many factors. So, and that doesn't help. I think what we do is we can look at people and say, well, why did you go on that antidepressant? There must be something wrong with you. Why am I on this antidepressant? There must be something wrong with me. And if we look at the gospel, when that was Jewish thought when Christ came to earth, that if someone had a malady, they sinned or their forefathers sinned. And so when Jesus cured the blind man, people said, well, he either sinned or his forefathers sinned. And Jesus said it was neither. So the same thing can be the case for depression. That being said, my son, Christian, who was on this show, and he admitted on our show live to everyone that he was smoking pot. He didn't have an addiction to it like Kendra did, but it could have developed into that. He hadn't been smoking it long enough. He got into that because he wanted to be liked, and peer pressure was his idol. And he suffered from depression and anxiety, which started in middle school and his was exacerbated by a social circumstance of not feeling like he fit in with a certain group at his school. He didn't have a place to go. He'd walk around alone at lunchtime. A horrible feeling. Interestingly enough, I experienced that in first and second grade. And
so did John.
Yes, exactly. So maybe my son inherited the walk alone at recess syndrome. And but my son, Christian, his depression and anxiety is gone after he let go and went to the sacrament of confession around succumbing to peer pressure and caring what people thought. As he let go of that sin, so disappeared his depression and anxiety. Praise God.
Did you ever take him in, and did he go on meds for a while, or did you see this being, a trained?
I didn't think it was at that point.
Okay.
Yeah, he clearly started to get migraines. It did start to manifest physically. He hasn't had migraines since he got happier. And so he clearly, his anxiety. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. When in high school, the fear of being rejected or outside of a peer group was still there. And I drove him to a party, and he made me park 5 blocks. He was so nervous. He couldn't stand to be in his own skin. And he's like, Mom, I got to be cool. You cannot drop me off. You cannot drop me off. And so he made me drop him off 5 blocks away from the party so that he could work off his anxiety and also appear without his mom, which was cool.
Oh, that is so great.
I was really
so
embarrassment.
Great. And then his anxiety is gone. He gets on live radio to share stuff. I mean, like, what a transformation.
Yes.
Confession, everyone.
Confession. Use that as part of it.
Let's not eliminate the spiritual aspect of it. It is definitely part and parcel, but not the only answer. Sure, people do get miraculously healed, of course, but I think we want to remove the stigma from this being a something's wrong with you thing. And have people feel open enough to share it, and others to actually ask and offer their help. I read a lot about people saying it's just nice to be acknowledged. Are you okay? Don't even ask if there's something that you can do. I read an article where the guy said in some cases we don't have the right mind to make those decisions and to say, yes, yes, you can help and here's what you can do. So say, hey, I'm making chili. I'll bring over a bucket, a pot of chili.
Kendra, that's going to make the person so depressed.
You got problems. I'll bring over a pot of chili, something where you're just offering, hey, I'll take the kids tonight so you could have some time with your spouse or whatever the case may be to help them out a little bit. And then just be there for an ear and open your heart to it, because I read this one when you get into the suicidal level where it was like a 500-day breakdown for 500 days. And every single day she said it was a grace to not take her life. And I thought, oh my gosh, I cannot even imagine what that is like the overwhelming bodily urges in your mind just saying it is not worth it to be here. Mm-hmm. And she did say thank you for my faith, because that was what kept me going. But, I think that to me just blew my mind. And I know that suicide is a epidemic now. I can't get over how many people are taking their lives. I don't know any statistics on that, but I read it all the time.
Well, in terms of statistics, it's the third leading cause of death in 15 to 25-year-olds.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And in terms of how bad it is and how badly people feel, and speaking of moral character, I think most of our country can agree that Abraham Lincoln was a great leader of our country, and he suffered from episodes of major depression. And the person in major depression will say it's like waking up every morning and finding out your dog has just died, or I would much rather have another cancer than this. It's hell. And when in his own pen, Abraham Lincoln wrote to his law partner and said, I am now the most miserable man living. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on earth.
Oh, wow.
And there's also John Donne, who's a very, very famous poet. He too suffered from terrible depression. And so to think, these brilliant people are saying these words that are so crushing. He wrote, whensoever any affliction assails me, methinks I have the keys of my prison in mine own hand, and no remedy presents itself so soon to my heart as my own sword.
Oh. That's what this person with that 500-day episode or I shouldn't say episode, mental breakdown, right?
Yes.
That she said, I would look on the internet for ways to get cancer. What are the easiest ways for me to end this in a way that, isn't me taking my life?
So in the United States, someone commits suicide every 17 minutes, accounting for an astonishing 33,000 deaths per year. It is estimated that a majority of these people were suffering from some form of depression at the time of death. So either the depressive phase of bipolar disorder, where you're in a manic phase and then you go back to a depressive phase and back and forth, major depression, or alcohol and drug-induced depressive states. So let's not forget that alcohol and drugs are ultimately a depressant. They will make you depressed and not happy. Yeah, temporary high, but not happy. According to some research, 95% of those who commit suicide have a diagnosed mental disorder of some kind. And so suicide is the third leading cause of death overall among young people in the United States, aged 15 to 25. Suicide rates this is what you mentioned at the beginning of the show. Suicide rates among young people have risen over the past several years. An astonishing 1 in 10 college students and 1 in 5 high school students seriously considered suicide during the past year. And in the next 20 years, it's estimated that it'll be the second biggest drain on society in terms of care of human beings. Women attempt suicide 3 times more often than men, but men complete suicide twice as often as women. Over half of suicides are catalyzed by alcohol. And that's not surprising because you're not in your right mind and you're more likely to do something impulsively. It's not like depression in that if you have one attempt, you're more likely to do it again. Isn't that nice to hear?
Right.
If you have one attempt, you can go on to lead a completely normal life. And this is interesting. The person who is suicidal usually is very conflicted inside. Part of them wants to die and part of them doesn't. And this is just fascinating. So I lived in San Francisco for a long time, and until recently, the number one suicide spot in the world was the Golden Gate Bridge. in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So someone jumped from that bridge about every 2 weeks. And so barriers were put up by the city after 1,600 deaths. They said, we got to stop this. Yeah.
It took them that long?
And I know.
Although that's a pretty big bridge.
Yeah. Only a handful of people
that.
who have jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge have survived. And listen to this. A reporter interviewed those few who had survived the jump. It takes about 4 seconds after jumping from the bridge to hit the water. And the reporter put this question to the survivors. What was going through your mind as you were in the air for those 4 seconds?
Oh.
Every one of them responded that they regretted having taken the leap. As one man put it, I realized then that all of the problems in my life that I thought were unsolvable were in fact solvable, except for having just jumped.
That gave me goosebumps. That's crazy.
So that's the divided mind of the suicidal mind. And also, folks, for those of you who are listening, people don't normally joke about suicide. And if someone is mentioning it, even in jest, pay attention. That is a sign that it's on their mind. So play it safe. Which, with such comments and such thoughts, take them very, very seriously and take them to a doctor, or if they keep repeating it or if they're in a dangerous situation, you may, at the extreme level, have to do what's called a 5150, where you take them in, and if they are deemed suicidal, they're put on a hold and it's made sure that they're safe. But that saves many, many lives. And as a licensed clinical therapist, I've had phone calls with people where I've had to, on the other line, while I keep them online, call the police. And the police have broken down a door and saved a woman's life. So you got to take it very seriously. And when I was 18 on tour with the San Francisco Ballet Company, my best friend committed suicide. And she jumped from one of the balconies of our hotel. And I think back, and it was so true. I didn't know enough to really be worried, but I should have been worried because we'd carpool back and forth from the Bay Area to San Francisco to our dance classes. And she had a great sense of humor, and we'd this is before I became Catholic. Okay, I'm going to confess. We'd had a dummy in the back, just the waist up. Matilda was her name, and she was too white, so we painted her face with fingernail polish, and we put a hat on her even in summer, so she looked all bundled up. And she was our third person for the carpool lane.
That's so funny.
And sometimes Matilda would start leaning. We're like, sit up. And but she would say things like, she might have had a brush with another car the day before and say, I could be dead right now. I could be dead right now. So people don't normally talk that way. Mm-hmm. So I look back and I think, oh, why did she keep saying that? So pay attention to what people say.
And I'd like to go back to those symptoms. So when you say like irregular sleeping habits, okay, just more sleeping during the day, can't get out of bed at night, you're up, you're just all of that combined at the end of the day, because I'm sure all of us have had some of those episodes here and there. But when I read that someone cannot get out of bed, that to change their clothes, now that's a huge sign. But I'm just trying to look at the ones that might not even realize they have a mild case. And does it get worse? Is my other...
If it's not treated, depression can get a lot worse. Hence, I think the importance of people getting help right away. And remember, St. Teresa of Avila said, the straightest path to heaven is through humility. Now, if someone is prideful, and one of the biggest problems we have today is when a person has depression and anxiety and they're miserable, and we naturally, when we're depressed and anxious, we make the people around us miserable. And if a person says, I'll muscle through it, or I don't have a problem, it's everyone else's problem, or whatever it is, and they don't seek physical and spiritual help or psychological help, that's honestly pride.
Yep.
That's just pride. If it's lasted a while and nothing's changing and you've done what you can, it's time. We need each other.
Yeah.
We need each other. And this
good
book,
advice.
And the psychiatric branch of medicine has a lot to offer, and so do the sacraments, and so does prayer, and so does a good spiritual director. And if you're worried, hey, my religion, my Protestant or Catholic upbringing said you can't take medicine for anything. You can't go to a psychiatrist or psychologist. Granted, it's great if you can find a Christian, one who has the beliefs in God and in Jesus, but that's not always the case, especially if you're in a rural area. St. Pope John Paul II said the confessional is not and cannot be an alternative to the psychoanalyst or psychotherapist office, nor can one expect the sacrament of penance to heal truly pathological conditions. The confessor is not a physician or a healer in the technical sense of the term. In fact, if the condition of the penitent seems to require medical care, the confessor should not deal with the matter himself, but should send the penitent to competent and honest professionals. So the confessional was never meant to cure neuroses or other mental disturbances, and the couch was never meant to absolve sin. So
right.
it can, I will say this, adding to that it can, but it's rare that a person with a severe depression or mental disturbance walks out of the confessional and it's all gone. But it always helps. It always helps. And in some cases, it is prayer. If it's a spirit, and if it's a depressive spirit or a curse, in fact, and if that isn't removed through prayer and through repentance, then it's not going to go away. A new friend of mine, Father James Blunt, he's an exorcist, and I will say one of the holiest men I've ever met. He's a priest, Catholic priest, and he just shared publicly. I was speaking in St. Louis, and so was Kendra. We didn't know we were in the same town, which is pretty neat. And I was at the Benedictine monastery there. He's an exorcist, so he got a call that a woman was terribly depressed. Her name was Lupe, and she'd been in bed. She could not get out of bed. The clinical depression was so severe. And he asked the typical questions: is she on medication? Yes. Is she, does she have help? Yes. And she was just getting worse. And so he didn't have time to drive over there, so he did the work on the phone. And he picked it up. He said, "Lupe, will you pray with me?" And he said that her voice sounded like death warmed over, that it was the saddest voice he'd heard.
Oh.
And so I don't know if I can mimic it, but something like, "Hello, Father." Yes. Could not get out of bed. And so he said, "Lupe, will you pray with me?" Yes. Okay, repeat after me. And this is a beautiful prayer of deliverance that Father taught us. Most precious blood of Jesus, save us and the whole world. So we just had to repeat that, and believe it, and ask for joy, and repeat it. And suddenly he heard in the receiver, "Father!"
Now that was loud. I am sure if anyone fell asleep during this,
if
they
I
are
caused
up
a
now.
car accident. Sorry, I'm so sorry. And he said, "Yes, Lupe?" He goes, "I felt tingling all through my body. I'm feeling a little better. Good, Lupe. Keep praying. Keep saying it." And then I kid you not. So bilocation is something that we know the saints have experienced. St. Padre Pio experienced it. Others experienced it.
And that means you could be in 2 places, 3 places, right? Maybe.
Yeah,
even?
usually 2.
At the same time.
There is trilocation. St. Joseph Benedict, Joseph Lebray did trilocate. But in this case, Father Blunt said, I don't usually share what happened next. I'm going to share with you. He said, I found myself still with the phone floating over her bed. He said she was covered up, she was appropriate, and that he was there looking down at her. And what he saw wasn't just her, but at the foot of her bed, a sinister looking figure with gaunt and dark, with his hands crossed, just very upset with the prayer and hoping that it would end because he was kept at bay from her as it was going on. And then God told him in the spirit, that is there, that spirit, because of a curse on her, which is causing this severe, severe depression. So he said, Lupe, keep praying, keep praying. So they kept praying. And after a while, boom, he said this thing just left. And she said, Father! Something left. I feel better. And he said, yes, Lupe, something did leave.
Did he tell her that he could see her?
No, he's thinking, I'm right here. Don't have to yell. I'm actually above your bed. Can you imagine?
That is incredible.
What a story.
So that's, you never know, right? So
I mean, what a mystery. Mm-hmm. What a mystery depression is.
Oh my gosh. Cliffhanger. We're going to take a break. We will be back talking about depression on Find Something More, Find Your Way Home with Kendra and Christine. We are talking depression, and one of the things that I asked before we left on the break was symptoms for people to kind of identify whether they should get in and get checked, or if someone around them might be suffering from depression. Because I think, again, we just take it on ourselves to be our own doctors. And now with the internet, I mean, you got WebMD, you can figure anything out on your own and self-diagnose. A couple times I thought I had terminal illnesses because of what I found out there. So
did you? Are you alive?
I'm alive.
Okay.
I'm alive. I didn't do such good on the symptom identification. And I would Google that on someone else. So my husband was sick once and I'm like, oh, maybe he's dying. So I'm not going to tell him about what I saw. So go see a doctor. That's what they're trained for. Speaking of trained, and you've got a little bit more expertise in this, I had mentioned the whole sleeping thing, the erratic sleeping.
Oh yeah.
And we didn't kind of, is it just all of it, all of the above? You're up at night, or you have to sleep too much.
The most common type of sleep disruption is that you can't sleep very well, and you'll get up too early and not be able to return to sleep. And then the less common version is sleeping way too much.
Wow, I would have thought it would be opposite.
Yeah, no, the depressed person might lie in bed for hours with insomnia, and so the person is sleep deprived, and that makes depression worse. So it's very, very difficult. And this exhaustion and drained energy is also a core feature of major depression. And so people don't understand how drained they are. And just having a conversation with someone can be a Herculean effort on their part. It takes so much energy just to hold a conversation or just get out of bed and walk down the stairs. What a horrible thing, no? So it's atypical that the disturbance takes the opposite form and the person is sleeping too much. Low energy, though, is not atypical. Also, changes in psychomotor function, in that normally if we're sitting in a chair, we fidget a little bit and we'll move around. But the depressed person sometimes doesn't move very much at all. There won't be quick reactions to things. There won't be a startle response like there normally is. Or they won't be they'll be uncomfortable in their body and they'll move around a lot and just not be able to feel comfortable in their own body. And I mentioned the inability to focus. So in addition to these emotions of pervasive sadness, fear, dejection, hopelessness, a lot of self-hatred is very common in depression, and often feeling like it will never end, which is a lie, but the person is convinced that this is the way things are, and views themselves in a negative light, views their circumstances in a negative light, and views the future in a negative light. And perception is also changed. So a depressed person will look at a picture of a neutral face and see a sadness or anger or something bad in it, whereas someone who's not depressed will not see the same thing in that face. So changes in sensory perception is also part of it. And change in appetite. So there's often movement either way in weight loss or weight gain. And then inappropriate feelings of guilt. So guilt is natural, it's healthy, but what happens is there's more of a sense of shame that the person did something wrong, and then they either can't forgive themselves or they feel like they are wrong rather than they did something wrong. So they can't let go of it. It's just stuck. It's a sense of being tortured by having done wrong and being wrong. And then I also mentioned what's called Anhedonia, which is a loss of pleasure in life. So a person could formerly, if they weren't depressed, say, I just love Cheerios. They make me so happy. And then when they're depressed, Cheerios mean nothing. A beautiful tree with flowers on it looks like nothing. Any spiritual pleasure, not there. Lowered libido. Pleasure just is not available to the person. We talked about suicidal ideation, which means thinking about death. And we talked about anxiety. So in a majority of the cases, depression is associated with anxiety to some degree. And, you know, I experienced that when I was working at a pregnancy center, and they changed their focus from something that was life-giving to something that was very confused. And I was in a pickle, and I knew that God was asking me to confront the leadership, which is not my kind of personality. I didn't want to do it. And it was making me so anxious to have God push me into that, and anxious to be in a job where I felt like because it was a pro-life agency that was becoming neutral on the issue, that I was supervising counselors in a way that I couldn't help save lives the way I wanted to. And instead, I felt like, is blood going to be on my hands? I'm here to serve Lord. I'm here to serve life. I'm here to help the women in any way I can and the men involved. But I can't, God is not neutral on this issue. And so that caused anxiety. And I remember just thinking, I can't control this anxiety. Prayers, mass, confession, this is not going down. And so I remember I looked in the cupboard, and I had this old little thing of some operation. I've had a few of them, a little bit of liquid codeine. So I took that. And then when that codeine wore off, I was more anxious than before. And I want to caution y'all out there, if you're dealing with anxiety, you gotta, and it goes on, you will probably try to find something like alcohol or drugs or something to get rid of that horrible, horrible feeling. Once it shot through the roof, and I told my husband, I said, this is the worst. I felt like I had to get up at like 1 a.m. and walk outside and walk around because of the way it was just and it really gave me so much compassion for someone dealing with anxiety, because you can't stand being in your own skin, and you feel like you need to take something. You're screaming for relief. And, ever since I've had the 10 milligrams of Celexa, I've never had a bout like that again. Hence the close connection between anxiety and depression. And I've never had, as I said, major depression, but I have had dysthymia, kind of a low grade. I think when I was young, there was definitely, there would be a whole year where there'd be a low grade kind of sadness. And I remember being in a ballet class, and the teacher said, if you keep putting your face in that frown, you're going to get stuck like that. And that made it worse. I went, oh, stuck right there, make my face a red photo. And I didn't have a good reaction to her words. But I know she, in retrospect, she was just trying to be helpful. So another thing is so anyway, God bless you if you have anxiety. My point is, please seek help. Don't try to self-medicate, because if you take something that's a barbiturate or a depressant like alcohol or codeine, you'll feel better for a moment. Then once that's out of your system, you'll shoot into more anxiety, because what that does is that represses the anxiety response. It suppresses it, and then it bounces back full force. So it's not going to help you. It's going to make it so much worse. Valium and such is all the same kind of barbiturate.
Is that like Xanax and
Xanax,
things like that?
All of those things. They're a temporary help, but you can get hooked on them. By the way, folks, you cannot get hooked. People think, oh, I don't want to be hooked on an antidepressant. You can't get hooked on it. There's no addictive nature to it whatsoever. So, because there's no high.
I thought you had to wean yourself off. What's that all about?
That's because you don't want a sudden chemical change in your body.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you don't want symptoms that you don't need to have. But that's different from addiction. We become addicted to substances because they make us feel better in a way that gives us a bit of a high. Ain't no high going on with an antidepressant. In fact, you mentioned a friend who didn't want to take it because she felt lack of joy. She felt not joy, but lack of deep feelings, good or bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't have that. 10 milligrams is very small, and I have typical emotions, the whole range, from wanting to kill someone. I'm kidding, not that kind of range.
How long have you, if you don't mind me asking, how long have you been on them?
I'm not good with time. It's been
years,
5 years. 5
Okay.
years? Yeah. I went off for a while, and I thought maybe I don't need them anymore. And then a couple stresses kicked in, and I said, heck, I want to go back on this.
Really?
I thought I got a lot to do. I don't want to feel low.
Right.
It wasn't debilitating. It just wasn't the fun and happiness that I normally feel. So I really do have a chemical deficiency right now. And I have had, some severe things happen in my life, and some illnesses and things that I can see why my system would be depleted.
Yeah.
The brain is an organ like any other, and it gets old. I have an old brain. So diet is another thing in terms of, we can get depressed and anxious by having a lack of certain vitamins, and diet, and not ever going outside, and you don't want to be too sun exposed, but we have a typical lack of B vitamins and D vitamins in the North American diet, and a lack of fish oil. So omega-3 fish oil in high doses can help, not just low doses. That won't do enough. And what's recommended across the board for people with depression is what's called a Mediterranean diet. And what goes into a Mediterranean diet is, this is kind of funny, brightly colored vegetables. Are there any vegetables that are not brightly colored? Maybe we could think of those later. Fish.
Yeah, right.
Fish, olive oil or vegetable oil. Moderate to light on meat, complex carbohydrates such as rice, pasta, and bread. And you avoid carbohydrates, mainly sugars and processed foods. So those do not help. I would add, you tend to kind of want to avoid caffeine and definitely alcohol or drugs. And by the way, marijuana is a drug. Nowadays people think it's not a drug. It is. And so, and a multivitamin is good because you get those things that are deficient.
I never take vitamins. I need to.
Yeah.
I'm bad. I have about 10 different bottles in my cabinet, but I never take them. And they're expensive. When you get the good ones, I mean, they're not cheap. I'm sure they're all expired now, but
Yeah, you might
I'm
grow an
bad.
extra limb if you took them now, because I can't. And do you want? Should we go into more into the treatment? I kind of moved in
Yeah,
that
let's
direction.
do that. Hmm.
Okay, so I'm giving treatment as an LCSW licensed clinical social worker, hoping that you will not just listen to this show and say, "Well, that's all I need." Uh, please, please, please talk to somebody. um, Having a therapist, someone who really will listen to you, is such a blessing, because there are things in our past that can contribute to depression, especially if there's any trauma or abuse or just a hard time that we've never really worked through. And we don't even realize how damaging some chronic negative thoughts can be until we express them to someone else, and someone else helps us work through that. One of the things people who suffer from depression do is they think in terms of wishful thinking. If only this, or if only I could that, or I would love this, but not that. And it's a continual setup for disappointment, failure, unhappiness, because if you want to be the great lawyer or the actress and you keep thinking, I would be happy if, or wouldn't it be nice if that, well, usually the next day it's not that.
Right.
And so there's no recognizing the blessing of the moment. And one really can only be relieved of any kind of depression or happy if one is where God is. God isn't in the past. God isn't in the future. God is only in the present moment, and the next present moment, and the next present moment. So one has to find what is good, what is there to be thankful for in the moment. Because thinking about the past is the way the devil gets us to regret and fret and try to think of how it could have been different. And granted, there is time for healing to go back into the past and dig it up, and that's very important, but not to have it hammer in our head over
Right.
and over again through guilt or wrong. That is just so depressing. I mean, my sins are egregious, and I'm so blessed that in my baptism, God kind of wiped it out to the point where, yes, when I think about it, I'm so sad and my repentance is stirred up. But if I had that in my mind all the time, if St. Paul were constantly thinking about all the Christians he had killed, he wouldn't have been able to function. He would
Right.
have thought, I'm just such a sinner. I can't believe I did that. We wouldn't have had the great evangelizer that we had if St. Paul had been stuck in his
Right.
past, right?
Hmm. Yep.
So, and to worry about the future is a waste of time. The future will take care of itself. So the present moment is where the depressed person needs to look for the good and try to work on with the therapist or someone else how to get past the wishful thinking and the regretting and the over accentuated guilt. And where else in your life besides right now, as Kendra has to listen to me, and you all have to listen to me if you have this on and you have no choice, well, you can turn it off, you're lucky you, is someone going to just listen to you for a full hour? Where do you get that luxury of just blabbing on and someone is intently listening to you, and if they're a good therapist, caring about you? And so it's a unique, safe environment that a person with depression needs that. So clinically, they need to talk it out. Clinically, that's one thing. The other thing, they need to eat well. I mentioned the Mediterranean diet. They need physical exercise. And it's either 3 days a week, about 45 minutes of sweating it out, getting the heart rate up, or 20 minutes a day is what's recommended. Those endorphins are really necessary for the brain to think differently. And so sleep hygiene, you basically, and social interaction. Isolating And not doing healthy things, doing things like pornography, too much TV, eating junk food, solitariness, and idleness are what the depressive mind chooses to do most often, because that's what it feels like it wants to do. The depressive mind is like, just don't bother calling back. Just don't go out. Just watch this stupid show on TV. And that makes the person feel worse. So routine is good. Sleeping at the same time, getting up at the same time, making those social calls, even if it's painful, and being around people, even if it's painful, is better than social isolation. So the depressive brain is going to oftentimes think of the wrong thing to do. And if the person can at least intellectually know that when they're depressed, they can, with that effort that's so hard, do the opposite oftentimes of what their brain is telling them to do, especially when it comes to isolation and idleness. Do something, make something happen, no matter how hard and awful it is. Go out, take a walk, be outside for a moment. Don't just sit there. So that's common advice, to have some social interaction. Now, and medication. If these things don't work, if your prayer life is good, you're going to Mass as often as you can, you're praying, you're calling on the saints for help, and you're doing everything you can spiritually, and it's just not working, medication is most likely in order, and go see a doctor and tell them your symptoms, and they'll find out if it is indeed depression, or if it's related to, you have to be honest, people on substances, people who drink too much or take drugs, they don't confess that to their doctor. They never put down what they're really doing. So be honest, okay? Be honest with what you're really doing and what you're really taking.
I think that was one of the reasons also why I decided that I didn't want to stay on them either, because it's recommended highly, and I'm usually one that ignores those and just take my meds and have my wine anyway. But for me at that time, I was, smoking and drinking, and I'm like, okay, I don't need to add this to the mix. Who knows what this is going to do? So I said, all right, I'll just deal with being tired. And
that's why you didn't have antidepressants, because you had so many other substances.
And then it was strongly. I mean, she was like, you don't drink on this, because I thought, okay, there's something that's really going to happen to me, and I was like, I don't think I could do that. So
that's funny.
Wine or antidepressants.
Wine.
Yeah. It won. Oh, that's funny.
So, and there's still hope. Okay, let's say you've tried medication, which is in order. If nothing else is working, it's definitely likely that it's going to help you. And by the way, this is kind of neat. Statistically, when it comes to will an antidepressant work for depression, it works 100%, cures it 1/3 of the time. Another third of the time it helps. Another third of the time it does nothing. And those same statistics apply when you try a different antidepressant. You try a different one. There's a 1/3 chance it'll cure it. There's a 1/3 chance it'll help it. And there's a 1/3 chance it won't do anything. So keep trying. You may get the right one. And you could, like me, I was 100%. 100%. That feeling was gone. I was back to how I normally felt. And then if all that fails, then you have like ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy, and you're thinking, are you kidding me? People think of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It's actually very mild today. It's not what the movies show. It takes a few minutes. The patient lies anesthetized and asleep with barely a muscle twitch. So the technique is non-invasive, and it doesn't involve surgery, and it can be actually a huge help. So basically, if you have access to treatment, and if you're suffering from major depression or you know someone who is, don't wait. Please don't wait. Go out there and get help, because if you have a depressive episode, you're more likely to get another one without treatment. And if you have two, you're even more likely to get another one, and so on and so on. So you're not a
Wow.
bad person,
Yeah.
you know.
And keep praying. I did find some saints. So if you want to enlist the help of some saints and angels to intercede on your behalf, there's Saint Dymphna, Dymphna, and Saint Raphael, the Archangel, Saint Amabilis, and Saint Jude. So call on the saints to help. And let's, speaking of prayer, wrap up with a prayer for all those who have depression in some way, shape, or form impacting their lives.
Okay. So, Lord Jesus, I ask you to come now to all of the listeners, especially those who may be suffering from some form of mild or serious depression, or someone who knows someone who is suffering. Lord Jesus, you are the great healer. We know that you did not intend from the beginning with our parents, Adam and Eve, for depression to have entered the world. But because we are in a world with original sin and the consequences of it, we do suffer. And whenever we do, we are on the cross with you, and we have a chance of saving souls through our pain. But Lord, you do not intend to keep us there forever, and nor have you put us in that place. The only thing that we can control is trying not to sin. So Lord, help us not to turn away from you, even though we should feel like you're not there and you don't care, because the opposite is true. You are there. You always are there, and you care more than anyone on earth. You deeply care about how we feel every moment. So Lord, help anyone listening, anyone who's being cared for by someone who is listening, to be lifted from their pain, to find some relief, to find some help, and to know that this too shall pass, and the glory of God waits for those who love him. God bless you. This is Kendra and Christine with Find Something More, Find Your Way Home.